Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our third webinar, which is on visualizing evaluation data, presented by Marinda Kotzé. Before I introduce Marinda, just some reminders. Please keep your mics muted and video off at all times. We encourage you to pose questions. To do so, please write your question on the chat. Remember to post to everyone so we can all see each other's questions. Marinda will answer questions at the end of her presentation. Now I'll introduce Marinda and then hand over to her for her presentation. Marinda is a research psychologist and the executive director of Kaninzi Research Consulting. She has worked on a range of evaluation, technical writing, and data analysis projects over the last few years at Kaninzi. Previously, Marinda served as a researcher and evaluator at the South African Medical Research Council and the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. She is currently pursuing a PhD in psychology at the University of Pretoria. I will now hand over to Marinda.
Thank you for the introduction, Alawani. Good afternoon, fellow evaluators and evaluation enthusiasts. I'm really excited to join you this afternoon. As Alawani mentioned, I am the Executive Director of Kaninzi Research Consulting. It's a virtual research and evaluation company that offers a variety of services, including desktop research, survey research, especially online surveys, including formative process and summative evaluations, quantitative and qualitative data analysis, data visualization like infographics, visual reports, and posters. And we also offer technical writing and editing. So as evaluators, we frequently need to find ways to communicate our data to our clients, to our colleagues, to our funders, and other stakeholders. And we typically end up communicating our data to tell one of four stories: how far a program or organization is at achieving its targets, how a situation has changed over time, how different subgroups or two different groups fare in comparison to each other, how different subgroups are affected by an issue, and where certain groups, incidences, or concepts are located, either geographically or conceptually. So in this webinar, I'm going to go through these four types of stories and show you what types of charts are best suited for each story and how simple adjustments to well-known charts can communicate your message even better. You'll note that most of the charts in this webinar was created using Excel 2016. I believe that Excel and PowerPoint are really powerful tools for data visualization, and that's why I've chosen them as the focus of this webinar. Unfortunately, we have limited time, so I can't explain exactly how I created each graph. I would love to, but unfortunately I can't. So I've added to most of the slides, I've added web links to tutorials that you can view on the web. So as soon as this webinar slides are available, please download them and go have a look at those tutorials and have fun. So a very common task for us as evaluators is to report on the progress that's been made in achieving performance indicator targets. And most of us typically turn to the clustered column chart like this one to visualize these types of data. There's nothing wrong with this, but I believe we can possibly do better. The overlapping bar chart is a simple way to visualize target versus achieved figures. You can create a single overlapping bar chart like this one, or several bars in one, like this, to visualize more than one time frame or indicator. You'll see I added slightly more detail to this one to indicate the actual number of tests. So this helps to give your audience a bit more context to help them understand what the percentage really refers to. The stacked column charts and pie chart can also be used to provide very simple illustration of the extent of progress that's been made. Combination charts like these two can be put to use to illustrate performance in relation to targets or to some sort of benchmark, any sort of predetermined kind of percentage. And gauge charts is another playful way to indicate progress to meeting a target. You can create them to visualize a single value like these, or you can create them so that they include ranges, so that you can convey a bit more information about what that value means in the context of the project. Is it good? Is it bad? Should we be worried? Data that sits in your spreadsheet right next to your data is another way to quickly visualize progress to meeting a target. And in the same way, you can also create deviation bars. They are basically the same as data bars, but they are specifically useful if you want to illustrate only the difference between the achieved and the target figures. And then lastly, of course, Gantt charts. They are quite useful to illustrate progress towards meeting a project deadline or some other time frame. You can create them from scratch in Excel, or you can use an Excel template, like these ones. When we want to illustrate comparisons, we often turn to column or bar charts. Basic bar and column charts are fine if you only have a few groups, so let's say just 2 or 3 groups that you want to compare. But the moment you want to compare more groups, and especially if you want to compare groups across multiple categories, becomes a bit too busy and complicated to use and understand. You could try something that's often referred to as small multiples, small multiple charts that presented side by side. This works especially well if you have maximum two to three groups that you want to compare across several categories. Another option is a clustered bar chart like this one, or the more unconventional side-by-side bar chart. A chart like this works because the bars are separate from each other, yet they're still in line with each other, so you can still compare them. And it just seems a bit less condensed. Yet another option is the dumbbell dot plot. It does away with the bars we know so well and replaces it with simple circles that's aligned so that you can easily spot differences and interpret them. But let's say you have more groups and categories that you want to compare. Like for example, here I want to include in one chart both gender, 3 categories for age, and rural and urban. Now this chart is a bit too busy to really make sense of. Okay, so you could try the 100% stacked bar chart like this one. However, what I don't like about this chart is that you can't sort categories for each group separately, so comparing them is not so easy. What may work a bit better is to create separate tree maps for each group. The idea here is to get a general sense of the data. You just want to see what it looks like. And because each category is sorted separately for each group, it's easier to spot differences and similarities. Another instance where we want to compare data is when we have 2 assessment dates, like a pre-test and a post-test, or a baseline and end line. Line charts work quite well for that. But maybe you want to add some sort of benchmark. You want to maybe visualize some sort of predetermined figure in relation to your scores. What you could try is shaded backgrounds such as these to place emphasis on certain zones in your charts. Adding background shading like this can make the graph a bit too busy. So I would suggest choosing really light shades for the background columns, or you could only use shaded columns for the areas that you want to specifically highlight, so maybe just top 20% or so on. As evaluators, we use Likert scales all the time. So how would you go about visualizing data from these types of questions? One standard way to visualize this kind of data is through basic bar charts. However, sometimes you want to only focus on one response from a question. Well, let's say I just want to focus on this everyday response. I just want to highlight that 82%. Now I can use a variety of visualization techniques to highlight that one figure. I could either present it on its own in text, or in the context of its maximum number. In other words, 100% through a bar chart or not a bar chart, a circle, a pie chart or a donut chart. Could use an overlapping bar chart like this, or a waffle chart, or a picture chart. And summarizing your data in this way helps to keep your visualization more concise and to the point. If you want to compare responses to different questions in your Likert survey, you can use a stacked bar chart like this. However, there are a few things that you can do to improve it so that it doesn't look so messy and busy as it does now. Firstly, you could remove the legend and instead add a text box on the top here above the first bar to indicate the bar labels more directly in line with the bars. What you could also do, if you think it's appropriate for your specific purpose, you could only highlight the response category that you want to emphasize, and then make the other response categories in gray or some muted color. This makes the chart look less busy and focuses the audience's attention on the data that you would like them to focus on. Another option is the diverging stacked bar charts, like this one. The idea behind this chart is that you want to align the bars in such a way that there is a middle point at the center of the chart that also indicates the center of the response options. The typically more positive responses will then be lying on the left-hand side, and the negative responses will be lying on the right-hand side. This chart is quite useful if you want to visualize in what direction sentiment or opinion is leaning towards. So just a last point on Likert scales, you'll notice that I use percentages in all my charts, but maybe you may feel like you want to use the whole numbers instead. Perhaps your sample was very small, you don't want to use percentages for that reason. Make sure to indicate what the total number of respondents and responses were alongside your chart. A stacked bar chart like this, where you add the total number of respondents for each question, could help give your readers or your audience some perspective on what that result means. This is especially useful if all your respondents did not necessarily answer all your questions. So line charts are typically your safest bet when you're visualizing patterns and trends over time. The reason for this is because time is considered a continuous variable and should therefore, at least in theory, run continuously across your charts. However, in some instances, you may have data for only some time points. Maybe you only collect the data every 5 years or so. A bar, column, or even stacked area charts like these will work much better, and it still does the job quite well. 100% stacked bar chart like this can be quite useful if one of your categories is particularly small and you want to emphasize that next to the larger other categories. Slope graphs is another simple way to visualize change from one time point to the next, and can be used, as in this case, to visualize different data collection points such as baseline, midpoint, and endline. If you simply want to visualize differences in scores over time, you could also consider simply charting only the positive and negative variance figures. In this example, I used the clustered bar charts and simply changed the negative values to red so that they stand out a bit more. One very quick way to visualize data over time is with Excel's Spark Lines feature. This feature allows you to quickly create a line or a column chart directly inside the cells in your spreadsheet. And lastly, of course, timelines. They are easy to understand, and they're specifically useful if you can add some additional text to give context to the numbers. You can create them directly in Excel using scatter plots like these, but there's also PowerPoint templates that you can use, and there's also infographic templates these days on online platforms like Canva, Venngage, and Pictochart that can help you create really nice looking timelines. A popular way to illustrate data on a map is with choropleth maps. In this type of map, data is displayed through various shades of color on a map. Typically, the shades are arranged in ascending order, so the lower values are represented with lighter shades and the higher values are represented with darker shades. Unfortunately, Excel doesn't have such a great data mapping function unless you have Excel 365 or Excel 2019. Those versions of Excel have a built-in feature where you can create cooperative maps automatically via Bing Maps. Just keep in mind, though, that when you use this feature, you are essentially sharing your data with Bing. So if you're working with sensitive data, it's maybe not such a good idea. Alternatively, what you could do is you could download empty maps from a site like dmaps.com and then fill them with the colors of your choice using a program like Adobe Illustrator, Inkscape, or even Paint. Bubble maps display data as circles of varying sizes on a map. The higher the value is, the larger the circle will be. So as you can see here, data bubbles can be plotted on geographical maps like these, but they can just as easily also be plotted on diagrams, photos, or illustrations. Heat maps use a color coding system to represent different data points as different colors. You typically see them in the form of a matrix or a table, where more favorable values are colored in green or some sort of soft tone, and less favorable values are colored in red or some sort of harsher tone. You can easily use conditional formatting in Excel to quickly create heat maps directly in your spreadsheet. A pushpin map literally pinpoints geographical locations that are of interest by plotting dots or symbols on a map. You can't create them directly in Excel, but there's other programs such as Tableau that you can use, and you can even, if you just want to create a quick map, you can use Google Maps. Lastly, another type of map that evaluators also like to use when they're specifically interested in visualizing relationships amongst people or groups, or even amongst concepts and keywords, is a social network map, or just a network map. Excel doesn't have specific tools for this, but there is an add-in called Node Excel that you can download, and another software tool that's often used is Gephi. So in the last couple of minutes of this webinar, I would like to show you a few tricks specifically related to effectively presenting data in PowerPoint. Using animation in PowerPoint has gotten a bad reputation over the years because people tend to overuse it. There's actually a lot of really amazing things that you can do with animation and slide transitions in PowerPoint. But you know, as they say, just because you can does not mean you should. Using animation in a tactful and strategic way is really key. So often we tend to present an entire visualization onto the slide straight away. This may be fine in some instances, but it could also confuse your audience. They stop listening to you and they're trying to figure out what's going on your slide, and then you may lose them. So instead, if you reveal the visualization piece by piece, and you could talk your audience through each section of the graph, explain each part in as much detail as necessary, and in doing so, you actually help to make your audience understand your visualization better. It could also be quite useful if you want to give more context to each segment of the chart. For example, if you'd like to explain why certain scores are unexpectedly high or unexpectedly low, this approach can be quite useful. So to get the timing and the order of the animation right, pay attention to these effect options here, and how the different sequences will look like in your particular chart. Play around with it and see what works. Considering that many of the animation options in PowerPoint can be a bit flamboyant, to say the least, I would suggest sticking to the more subtle animations like appear, fade, and wipe. Smart Art is a really good tool that we should use more. It helps us to move away from the boring bullet points that we always see in presentations, and it encourages us to use less text and incorporate more visual imagery in our slides. The process Smart Art is quite useful if you want to visualize timelines and project timeframes. Hierarchy is quite useful to illustrate networks, and relationship is quite useful to illustrate comparisons and parts to a whole. So I don't know if you knew this, but PowerPoint has built-in data viz templates. If you go to the File menu and you click on New, you'll find this search box that you can use to find these templates. They include timelines, charts and diagrams, as well as infographics and even some icons. Nowadays, it's becoming increasingly popular to abandon the traditional Word document and to replace it with the PowerPoint slide as a tool for creating reports and infographic posters. Think of PowerPoint or think of your PowerPoint slide as a blank canvas on which you can write, plot data, and insert images and diagrams. To get you started on this, you'll see under Design, Customize that you can actually change the orientation of the slide. You can make it portrait for reports. You can also change the size of the slide from A4 to A0. You can change it however you like. You can also change the background color. And if you go to View, Show, you'll see there's a bunch of visual aids that you can apply to, like, for example, the ruler and the grid lines to help you align your text boxes and charts and images in a way that will make it look professional. And Emery has written quite a lot about how to change your boring reports into exciting PowerPoint reports. So you can have a look at this blog post if you're interested in learning more about that. Just a last word on icons. If you have Excel 365, you're lucky, as you will have direct access to built-in Excel icons under the Insert Illustration function. However, if you don't have Excel 365, it's not the end of the world. There are at least two other options. Now, the very easy basic option is Excel's symbols. So essentially, you can go to Insert, Symbols, and then look for icons under the Web Things and Wingdings collection. So admittedly, the selection is not that wide and it's just very basic, but if you are in a hurry and you really quickly need a human figure or a tree or something simple, Symbols is your go-to place. If you have more time and you want to have something that looks a bit more professional and nice, go to one of these websites to download icons for free. Flat Icon is my favorite. So yeah, that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed this webinar and that you found it relevant to your work. My contact details are on the screen, and you're welcome to contact me if you have any questions.